Thank you, Alex, very much. In this issue, I'm to a large extent in the same league as you. I live in the United States, and I feel very bad about what's going on in Greece. And maybe I'm very distressed about it because I think I know more than most people about this problem. And I'm distressed about the way it's going. But anyway, I think that it's a great opportunity to discuss this issue here and to discuss it openly, especially with different points of view. So I teach at NYU, but I was visiting Berkeley, so that's how I came here for this talk. So the issue is, from my point of view, what's the crisis? Why bankruptcy of Greece is a bad option, and why leaving the euro together with the bankruptcy is the worst option. Okay, here is Poseidon looking over Greece, and as you see, there are some stormy clouds in the back. So this is the background. Now, more specifically, the background has to do with the euros. I hope you can see. These are the euros. And this is the piggy bank of Greece, and it's almost empty, and there are a few euros that are still there. Okay, let me try to do something more here. Okay. So, these are the problems that Greece has. There's three different problems, and together they make the situation very bad. First, it has a huge accumulated debt. Second, the public sector, the government, has big deficits. And they come from two main sources. First, there is very significant tax evasion, and it needs new tax enforcement. And second, it has a very inefficient public sector and corruption, widespread corruption in procurement, which make things very expensive when the government buys them. The third problem is the lack of competitiveness of the private sector. And to a large extent, this happened because of union power, and the wages kept increasing without productivity increasing. Lots of closed sectors, including trucks, taxis, pharmacies, engineers, lawyers, notaries, and so on, and not much competition there, and the fixed exchange rate that Alex mentioned a minute ago, that Greece was locked into the euro. Okay, so what are the options available to Greece? And they were voted, okay, today, right, already voted. In. Okay, so what are the options? One, to accept the lender's demands, do the loan restructuring, receive 130 billion of additional loans. That's option A. Option B is to reject the lender's demands, declare bankruptcy, so-called hard default or uncontrolled bankruptcy, but stay in the euro. And option C is reject the lender's demands, declare bankruptcy, and leave the euro and issue a new drachma. And in my opinion, option A is by far the best. Let me try to discuss why. First of all, I'll try to tell you what is going on with the loans. The situation erupted in May 2010, and by May 2010, Greece was very close to bankruptcy. So the Greek Prime Minister then, Yorgos Papandreou, accepted the IMF EU program of 110 billion loan with a promise of reduction of the public deficit and the liberalization of the closed sectors. But it didn't go well, at all. Why? There were various problems. There were too much short-term considerations versus long-term. There were disagreements among the lenders, between the EU and the European Central Bank, ECB and the IMF. Some of the parts of the program were not feasible, that they couldn't be done. But these being politicians, they agreed with each other that everything could be done, and that was it. But it wasn't, everything couldn't be done. And additionally, even the things that could be done, the Greek government proved inept in doing them. Didn't really do enough of what it agreed to do. Okay? A lot of its power has been given away. The Greek government does very little on its own these days. And every economic measure adopted this far was dictated by the EU, IMF, ECB lenders. And that's part of the problem, because there was a possibility to tweak the measures so they could be done, but they weren't doing it. And the mood is extremely sober in Greece. High unemployment, deep recession, very negative mood, and a lot of people equate the present crisis with the Nazi occupation in 41-44, which was, as you know, devastating for Greece, and plus it led to the extermination of Jews, especially in Thessaloniki. Now, what about the debt? The Greek debt started at 329 billion in 2010. By the end of 2011, it was 368. It grew. Okay. In May 2010, as I said, Greece received 110 billion from. Thank you. 110 billion from the EU, 80 billion from the EU, 30 from the IMF. That left about 210 billion kept by private parties. What are these private parties? Typically insurance companies and banks. A significant amount of the debt, 55 billion, is held by the European Central Bank, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Why is it so peculiar? Okay, the Greek GDP, gross domestic product, production essentially of Greece, fell because of the recession from 230 to 215 billion, and that meant that the sovereign debt increased from 145% of GDP to 169% of GDP at the end of 2011. So why does the GDP grow? I'm sorry, why does the debt grow? For two reasons. First of all, the Greek government has a deficit month after month, plus the GDP is falling, therefore these percentages keep growing. Now, once these percentages become big, once the debt compared to production is big, and now it's over 150%, it's difficult, if not impossible, to finance. Right now, even at 5% interest rate, the interest that Greece has to pay every year for the debt is 17.5 billion, which is 21% of its revenue. So 21% of all the taxes Greece has to pay just to take care of the debt. And this cannot really be done. It's unsustainable. And the financial markets know it, and because of that, the interest rates in Greek debt are extremely high. Look at this number. This is a real number. You read it off the Bloomberg financial report. The 1 year obligation of the Greek government trades at 497% interest rate. That's completely crazy. If you think about it, it's not 5, not 10, but 497, okay? And similarly, other ones are very, very, very high. So, and Greece cannot impose any reductions in the EU and IMF bilateral loans. So the only way to reduce its debt is to impose a haircut. A haircut means the following. Okay, so this is a picture of a haircut, but what does it mean in financial terms? It means what has become known in Greece as the private sector involvement, or PSI. So the PSI means that the Greek government is going to not pay the full obligations of its debt to the banks, but will take a cut, so-called haircut, of 50 to 70%. So, in fact, the banks are going to be paid back only 30 to 50% of what is really owed to them. Now, this is imminent. It's going to happen next week, because one of the laws that was passed today was Greece offering that to the debtors, a voluntary restructuring of the Greek debt, and even the amount is not completely clear because of the ECB. The European Central Bank holds 50 billion of Greek debt. It's not clear if they're going to convert it or not, so that's why the number is between 200 and 200 billion. Okay, so I won't go into all the details of this because it's kind of a bit too much finance for this time of the day. Let me just say that in broad terms, there are 3 or 4 elements that are crucial. First, it's voluntary. Okay, it's voluntary means that the banks in Greece agree that Greece is going to pay 30 to 50% only. Okay, so it's not imposed unilaterally by Greece, it's voluntary. This means that it's not an uncontrolled bankruptcy, and it's not considered in legal terms as a default. Or sometimes you might have seen in the newspapers, they call it, it's not considered a credit event. A credit event means that insurance against default is not active. So there's a voluntary exchange. You and I agree that you're going to be paid only 30%, but I don't default. Now, you might think that's crazy, but that's essentially where Greece is. This is a voluntary default that is going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. Okay, now the problem with this voluntary default is that some of the owners of this paper, of these bonds, are Greek banks. And they own 40 billion of these Greek bonds. And the Greek banks, if you look at how much they're trading for, their total market value is only 5 billion. All of them together. Half of it is the National Bank of Greece, and the other ones altogether 5 billion. So they have to take an accounting loss of 20 billion, which means they're bankrupt, right? They're insolvent. So what are we going to do with these insolvent banks? Greek government has to support them. Greek government doesn't have any money to support them, so it gets 30 to 35 billion from the ECB, again passed in today's vote, of money so that it will support the banks by issuing new common shares. Not voting for 5 years, voting later. Not voting for 5 years has some significance because it means that although Greece effectively owns these banks, it doesn't control them. The old people who control them still control them. Okay? In contrast, let me say that when Citibank was bankrupt in 2008 and the US financed it, it financed it with non-voting shares. That's just a detail for history, if you remember what happened in 2008 for Citibank. Okay, this I will skip. Essentially, I was just going through the impact in the rest of the world, the other banks. Let me just tell you, as far as the US banks are concerned, there is practically no exposure to Greek debt. So the Greek bank, I mean, US banks don't matter, don't get anything, they don't get hit by that. But French, German, and UK banks are. Let me go back to the options. Okay, so this is the first problem, the debt. So option A. Option A for Greece is first to accept this private sector involvement, the PSI, which means to accept, to offer the voluntary exchange of 30 to 50% to the banks. Okay, accept additional lenders' demands and receive 130 billion new loans from the EU and the IMF. Now, what are the specific lenders' demands, the additional lenders' demands? To cut the private sector minimum wage by 22%, to lay off 15,000 out of about 800,000 civil servants. Believe it or not, Greece, a country of 11 million, has 800,000 civil servants, which is an astoundingly large number. And just by attrition, it could easily lay off quickly 15,000 people, just because people die or retire and so on. Over 5 years, to reduce civil servants by 150,000, open the closed professions, reduce tax evasion, reduce supplementary pensions, and that to some extent is because a lot of the pension funds had invested in Greek bonds, and now the Greek bonds are worth much less, so they have to give back lower pensions, and then receive 100 billion loans for Greece and 30 billion for the banks to recapitalize. Okay, that's option A. Option B. Option B is essentially to reject the lender's demands and declare bankruptcy. Declare bankruptcy is not the same as the voluntary exchange. Declare bankruptcy means you don't pay anything. You just tell them, look, from now on, too bad, we don't have any money, that's it. You don't get anything. Okay, should they do it? Should Greece actually declare bankruptcy? There are some people in Greece who say that they should, and I think they shouldn't, but let me explain why. If you remember, in 2008, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. The US government and the Treasury Secretary Paulson at the time thought it was okay. They measured the effect, they thought it wasn't going to be a big deal, let Lehman fail. Lehman fail created a worldwide recession, big financial crisis that we're still living today. I believe that if Greece does something similar, there will be adverse effects similar to the Lehman crisis. So it's going to be bad for Greece, bad for the EU, bad for the United States. What would happen in Greece? Well, Greece is cut off from the financial markets if it defaults. So it has to balance its public sector. That is, its revenue has to equal its expenditures. which means that it will have to cut the public sector procurement and lay off about 20% of the civil servants the next day, because it cannot pay them. It cannot be done otherwise. Otherwise, we won't be able to pay them. Greek importers will have to pay cash. They cannot have any letters of credit because nobody trusts them anymore. There's going to be a huge disruption of trade. It will be very difficult for Greece to find imported goods. Necessities like drugs and fuel are going to become scarce. And Greece is going to be excluded from markets. Greek banks may collapse. EU banks will have significant losses. And the so-called credit event, because Greece is actually going to default, means that the CDS, which means the insurance that people have bought against Greek bonds, are going to be active, and there are going to be repercussions in many markets, including the US, and some of the issuers of these CDs are US companies. So option C. So we said option B. I think option B is bad. A is better. Let me tell you option C. Option C is the following. You reject the lender's demands, declare bankruptcy, and after declaring bankruptcy, you also leave the euro, and you start a new currency, a new drachma. Okay, let me tell you first of the consequences for the debt. The old drachma, when it was stopped in 2001, was about 340 drachmas to $1. I think a new drachma right now is going to be about 1,000 new drachmas to a euro. Sorry, I said a dollar before, I meant the euro. 340 to a euro, now 1,000 to a euro. About 3 times as much. So what does this mean? This means that the debt in euros suddenly gets multiplied by 3, because now people are going to have to pay it in new drachmas. So suddenly it's going to be a much bigger number. Outside the euro, Greece is going to be forced to borrow at very high interest rates, and I repeat here the interest rates I showed you before. These are the existing ones, they're going to be even higher later. The debt will become unsustainable again, and it will be hard to cut the debt because most of it, the remaining one, is in EU countries and the IMF, which is bilateral debt, not bondholders' debt. Second problem, inflation. A lot of things, I would say about 75% of things, are imported in Greece. If the new drachma becomes 3 times more cheaper than the old drachma, what does it mean? It means that prices in Greece are going to be multiplied by 3. Wages and pensions cannot adjust that quickly. Even if they do adjust, it will take them time. So from one day to the next, the person will go to the grocery store and see that he can buy 1/3 of what he used to buy. I mean, that's really a recipe for revolution. Civil servants will demand to be paid, and what's going to happen, Greek politicians who have proved not to be the most responsible people in the world are going to bring a lot of this currency. And that will create inflation, and over time hyperinflation, because there will be this big demand to keep printing money, the local currency, to keep paying the civil servants. So even though we might start at 1,000 new drachmas to a euro, over time it will get devalued more and more and more and more. So that's another consequence. I think there is another third consequence, which is maybe some people have missed, but it's very, very important. As leaving the euro is anticipated, that is before it happens, the Greek banks will collapse. Why? Because every depositor who has his money in euros in the Greek banks today, which are convertible and so on, are going to take them out. Because why would I keep my money in the Greek bank without knowing at what exchange rate they're going to be exchanged in the new drachma? What if the government does something wrong? And actually it's in the interest of the government to do something wrong, right? To put the wrong exchange rate. So I'll take it home. Or I'll bring it I'll put it in Switzerland or England or who knows where. So all the large depositors already have taken the money to Switzerland or England. The small depositors, the ones with 10,000 euros in the bank, are going to take them out as well. The banks are not going to survive, given that. No matter how much help they get, they won't be able to survive the expected creation of a new, non-convertible currency. And the ECB will withdraw its life support to Greek banks. Greek banks right now live through the life support of the ECB. Every asset they have pledged it to the ECB, and the ECB has given them cash. ECB is the European Central Bank. So without that support, the Greek banks don't survive. So this is going to happen as well. So in summary, what's going to happen if Greece leaves the euro? Banks collapse before the new drachma is introduced. Poverty, extreme poverty, as goods become 3 times more expensive. And hyperinflation, because Greek politicians will print more currency than necessary. And this will create a much more social unrest than what we have seen this far. This far we have seen the left parties, the ones in the opposition, with 36 to 40% in polls, which is unprecedented for decades. I mean, the last time left-wing parties had this percentage in the polls was in the 50s. So this is a long time before. And now things are going to get much worse. And let me say also this, especially for this audience, that besides all the economic reasons that I have mentioned before, there are significant national and political reasons for Greece to stay in the Eurozone in the core of the EU. There is a danger for isolation, for Greece being in isolation outside the Eurozone, in a neighborhood with a very aggressive enemy, which we all know, which can easily overpower Greece militarily. So if it was just up to the military, Greece is history, it doesn't exist anymore. But Greece needs the support of the EU and the US to counterbalance that military. And it has it to a large extent. But if it were to be outside Europe, it would be an isolated small country without any significant support, political support, to be able to counterbalance that. So this has been pretty negative. So let me say, is there hope? I think there is. The 2 largest political parties have accepted Dr. Papadimos as Prime Minister, former head of the Bank of Greece and Vice Chairman of ECB. The fact that he wasn't elected, as somebody mentioned, in my opinion, means nothing in a parliamentary system. But in a parliamentary system, the person who's Prime Minister is the guy who gets a majority of the people in the parliament. It doesn't matter if he's a politician, it doesn't matter if he's a technocrat. I have to admit myself, I'm biased for Papadimos. I know him from the time that he and I were both assistant professors at Columbia University, and I would vouch for his honesty, at least, and capabilities. Okay, so there is a tremendous need for work to be done. Very, very difficult work. And at the same time, the political parties want to have elections in 2 to 3 months. That's a very, very short time. Very, very short time. And a lot of Greeks have said, look, I mean, we have given up so much. Why should we give up more? And I think, and this is maybe the most important point, is that many Greeks have no idea how bad things could be if Greece declared bankruptcy and left the euro. And the fact they have no idea about it makes sense because they haven't lived through that. And the Greek media doesn't tell them enough about that. Okay, so the fate of Greece is very uncertain. Most likely scenario, this has exactly happened. Option A happened, essentially, with today's vote in the parliament. Implementation, in my opinion, I expect it to be limited. I don't expect miracles. So, because of that, I expect that in a few months, maybe in June, after the elections, the EU and the IMF will consider another package for Greece. Okay, so here is the good things about Greece. The weather, the history, and reasons to visit Greece. And if you want to see more of at least similar points of view to mine, we have made a group of economists in the United States and the rest of the world, and mostly abroad, which we call Greek Economists for Reform. Greek Economists for Reform. So we have other positions there as well. So I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and that's it for now. I'll be happy to have questions after